So hello, I'm Daniel McElroy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a senior academic mentor with ESM Prep, and we are really excited to be joined today by the team from Dallington. We've been working together for a few months to bring you this conversation, and I think it's going to be a really interesting one. We've been talking a lot about how both ESM and Dallington do quite different work with adolescents, but broadly speaking, it's very complementary. We both focus on mentorship. We spend our time thinking about, how teens can grow into their most fully realized selves and be set up for success with whatever they do, whether it's education, in the workplace and beyond that as well. But we're very excited to gain a new perspective today through Dallington's lens. And so we invite questions. Please feel free to leave questions in the question box that we will hopefully get to towards the end. But for now, I will sort of turn it over to the Dallington team. If you could all introduce yourselves, and then I think Farah will give us a bit of an introduction to what Dallington does.
Thanks, Daniel. So hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I'm the founder of Dallington. I'm also a mother. I have a master's in consulting psychology and I'm a family mediator. But one of my main passions, as you'll hear later in this webinar, is on digital well-being and how we can really understand these devices that are so involved in our lives for the better and be educated on the pitfalls that, are sucking a lot of our time and attention. And I look forward to talking to you about that in a bit.
Hey, thanks, Jess. And hello, everyone. I'm Dan. I'm the head of consultancy at Dallington. I'm also a Jungian psychotherapist of about 16 or 17 years now. And I'm particularly interested in a clinical sense and in terms of working with young people around the notion of individuation and this process of how our children become adults in that sense. I'm also the father of 3 teenagers, so I sit here with 2 hats on really. One is as a clinician and as a consultant, and the other really is right in the middle of that sweet suffering of being a parent of 3 teenagers too.
Thank you, Dan. So hi everyone, my name is Farah and I'm the head of mentorship here at Dallington. And alongside that, I'm also undertaking my doctoral training as a counselling psychologist. So really my work involves a lot of one-to-one work with our mentees here at Dallington, but I also work closely alongside Jess and Dan to develop the mentorship facet of the work that we do here. And that's really to ensure that that is evolving alongside the needs of young people today, as we can see that those are really rapidly changing. So alongside my training, I bring my lived experience as someone who has sort of hopped across a few different continents and lived in several different places, but also undergone a quite significant career transition myself. And so I find that those experiences and challenges really underpin some of the empathy that I can bring to my work with mentees. But so also, as Daniel mentioned, I'm just going to sort of contextualize this talk today with a little bit about what we do here at Dallington, as we're here to talk about sort of the challenges of late adolescence, not only for young people, but for the wider family unit too. So really at Dallington, what we do is offer support to young people aged 16 to 24, as well as their families as they enter adulthood. And so we work online with families all across the world, but also really enjoy doing our face-to-face work. We're based here in London. And so we work with local families or students that have moved here for education. As for our core team, you've met Jess and Dan here today, but we are a really unique mix of mentors, psychotherapists, psychologists, and also a really wonderful support team too. So that's us. And in regards to who we work with, although there is sort of no typical mentee, so to speak, I guess you could say that we often step in to support young people through some form of a transition. So that could be a transition maybe within the family unit. It could be a move abroad to a new city or country, or even the transition into a new school or workplace. And although not all of our mentees, certainly not all of them, are facing mental health challenges, many of them do come to us with symptoms or even diagnoses of conditions such as anxiety and depression. Not only that, but as you'll know, young people are really well versed and more communicative on those matters too. So this is really where we see the benefits of having this sort of multidisciplinary support team of mentors and therapists, where those benefits can really be felt, because we can kind of come together to centralize the support so that it is sort of connected and holistic in nature. I guess in terms of how and what that support entails, we work collaboratively with a young person and their family at the initial stages to develop that support plan in collaboration with them. And that's really to ensure that it not only meets their unique set of needs, but sort of off the bat for a young person to feel as though they are involved in this process. I guess the sort of nature of the work, it involves a number of weekly sessions. There's also interim support. And in terms of what form those sessions take, that can really vary. But what we would say is they have both personal and practical touch points. They can take the form of open exploratory conversations, workshops, activities, family meetings, and more. And our practical sessions, those are sort of set with the intention of helping young people better manage themselves. And so those are activities that center around time management, scheduling, budgeting, and those are just a few examples. But regardless of the form that these take, what I would say is that our sessions are united in the aim of supporting our young people to develop their independence, self-awareness, confidence, and empathy. Those are sort of our 4 key touch points. I'll come back to sort of round up at the end, but I think for now I'll just hand over to Dan to tell you a bit more about the process of individuation.
Thank you so much for that, Farah. Great. So yes, as you just said, let's sort of jump into this conversation with Dan. So I know we've heard mention of individuation so far this morning. Could you just start off by telling us what that is, individuation?
Yeah, sure. So it comes from the psychoanalytic tradition. I'm a Jungian therapist, and it comes from the theories of Carl Jung in that sense, and the work after him. And really, I think the most succinct kind of way of putting it is it's the and differentiate it. So it's a development of a psychological individual as being distinct from the collective psychology around us, and in particular from our parents. So Andrew Samuels, a Jungian analyst, called it the realization of the self over a lifetime. And within the Jungian frame, I mean, it's a lifelong process. It's something that we continually develop in that sense, but there's acute developmental phases around adolescence and young adulthood. And then again, as many of us know, in midlife again, in that sense. And I think it's really important to stress that within this frame, what arises in the process of individuation has a teleology or a purpose. And that purpose is to become an individual. So to have this kind of distinct sense of individuality and a personality. But it's also about becoming whole too. So as we make that transition from childhood to adulthood, it's about kind of gathering all the various kind of disparate parts of us into one place in a sense. So it's the kind of, from a Jungian perspective, it's maybe the first time that children are able to encounter the world and kind of go out into the world without the restriction of their kind of parents' psyche and psychology around them. So it's like a rebirth, really, like a kind of psychic revolution with all the difficulty that entails, really. I think one of the things that's really useful about it in that sense is that we can begin to imagine all these difficult kind of aspects of adolescence and young adulthood within the context of this kind of birthing process and this kind of imminent source of energy and a future way of being kind of coming through. And so then all the upheavals, all the crises, all the wounding experiences and the kind of disturbances, they start to have value because we stand back and we see them as part of this kind of holistic kind of process that happens in a way. And by doing so, we bestow meaning on these different kind of aspects of young adulthood and adolescence, so that And I think my field of psychotherapy is probably guilty of this over time, so that we don't kind of trap these young people and start to pathologize them, and these normal things that go wrong and have to be recovered, they don't become kind of labeled as kind of crazy or delinquent or unwell in some way. And we kind of resist making too quick judgments, because the less we're able to hear that there's a real kind of natural psychological struggle at this age, and that struggle is all part of individuation, the more that young people tend to then amplify their behaviors until we can hear it in that sense. You know, and we begin to, within an individuation frame, we begin to realize that young people aren't just clamoring for attention. They're not just kind of looking to always upset us, it's part of it too. But they're really wrestling with this emergence into adulthood.
Okay, thanks. And Dan, what are some of the key themes of individuation that parents maybe need to be aware of in their adolescence?
Yeah, there's a few. So I'm just going to highlight kind of 4 or 5. I'll start with a pretty easy one, or a nice one in that sense. So I think adolescent and young adult friendships, and by extension, kind of falling in love, you know, I think it's fair to say they're kind of rooted much more so than adult life in this kind of heart capacity to really open unreservedly and connect to other people in a really kind of direct and uncensored kind of manner. So it involves a lot of vulnerability and a lot of willingness to share complicated feelings with each other. It's quite different from our more kind of settled and defended kind of way of developing friendships as an adult. And so in that sense, kind of loyalty and faithfulness to a peer group is really notable at this time, and parents can suddenly feel excluded from the inner lives of their children, maybe for the first time, because this kind of group code that develops, you know, almost replaces that former closeness of family life, at least for a while, and that's quite painful for a lot of parents to kind of live through. And the kind of flip side of friendships, and you know, and that side of things, is betrayal, really. And I think, again, it's fair to say that the sting of betrayal in adolescence and young adulthood is really cutting. It kind of has a tendency to unleash a whole torrent of emotion and kind of upset, and disrupt this, you know, this fragile developing sense of being an adult in the world. It's but adolescents often betray each other, you know, in large and small ways. It's not unusual at all. So they spend a lot of time trying to kind of repair themselves, and that can look, you know, like many different things. It can look like withdrawal from the world. It can look like a sudden kind of crises over 2 or 3 days. And again, within an individuation frame, as a parent or as someone working around this kind of age group, just being mindful that this kind of underlying bubbling friendship betrayal, this dialectic that kind of occurs in a sense. So to take a more kind of darker turn, I think another theme is thoughts of suicide and death, really. And I think, you know, in my experience working with this age group over many years now, young adults are really attuned to the predicament of life, you know, and human existence, the fact that we're all mortal and we're going to die, really. Because at a psychological level, adolescents are undergoing experientially a kind of death and dying process. They're dying off to childhood. They're having to leave behind certain ways of being in the world, certain ideas about themselves or about their parents, or about how the world will look after them. And so they're acutely kind of sensitive to loss and the passing away of things in that sense. And again, as adults, we're at more of a distance to that, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes we've kind of moved on from that icky transitional phase in a sense. But it's worth mentioning here, I think, because as parents and as a parent of teenagers in that sense, we're inclined to panic, I think, sometimes when these strong kind of feelings or conversations about death or dying or suicide emerge. And rather than remaining curious and really kind of leaning in and trying to think more deeply about what it's about, we start to ask really kind of anxious questions. Are you going to hurt yourself? Is something going to happen? And they're valid questions too, and it's always useful to consult a professional if you're worried at all. Risk management is very important in that sense. But quite often young people are at a psychological kind of deeper level, they're just trying to express something almost in the hope that we can contain it in a sense, and we're not going to too quickly literalize it. We're going to just suffer the difficulty of that alongside them in a sense. So we almost kind of, as adults, we need to model that these kind of feelings can be tolerated, and they are a part of life. They never quite go away. And of course, as we get older, we get more confronted with death of peers or parents and the various kind of crises of life in a sense, and that it's important that we find a place for that in ourselves.
Right.
So,
Thanks.
okay.
Are there any others?
Yes, there are. Thanks, Dave. Well, I mean, I guess in a more general sense on that theme, there is this kind of period of grief and loss, as I just alluded to in a sense. And I think another factor of that is as the dependency needs shift, young adults begin to see their parents in a less idealized light from younger life. And we have to kind of suffer that, our inadequacies, we're not perfect, we're doing our best here. And suddenly it's very apparent to our children that, we have deficits, there's aspects of their development that we couldn't quite kind of bridge across to in a sense. And this idea of a perfect mother or a perfect father begins to dissolve, and it can be replaced by a kind of sense of loss and mourning. And that mourning isn't always so quiet. It can be quite angry too, in that sense. And as parents, you're having to deal, I think, with this kind of battleground of adolescent and young adult life in a sense, where at this age, it's not unusual for our children to both want to be treated as an adult and to be able to stay out late at night and and then be collected at some earthly hour in the morning or something like that. And yet they want to sleep in the next morning, potentially, not go to school or go to work or something like that. And there's a justifiable frustration in parents that comes with that. But an individuation process, again, takes account of the fact that these are competing energies it will take time for our children to kind of work that out in that sense. And to finish, Daniel, if we have time, and these are ones, again, that I think parents often kind of worry about in that sense. One is obsessive behaviors. We've kind of lost the art of ritual in our society, I think, certainly in a westernized society. And so it's an important part of growing up, to have rituals that hold meaning. And in adolescence and young adulthood, that often has a repetitive kind of quality about it. And I come across lots of parents that are very fearful of developing obsessions in their children, or their kind of adolescent children. Again, from an individuation frame, it's having trust that there's a process underway. It can seem threatening to us when suddenly our children kind of narrow in their psychological scope, and they either want to hang out exclusively with one person, or they watch the same film over and over again, spend loads of time, as Jess, I'm sure we'll discuss later, on the same app or the same kind of video game or something like that. And I think as adults, in the service of individuation, we need to remember that as adults, we have all these responsibilities. And so we have to strive for balance and structure and a kind of regulated activity. But the gift of adolescence, young adulthood, is that's not quite arrived yet. So they have this kind of relative freedom to just, be obsessed about one thing and then kind of jump onto something else in a sense. So it's important to try and find ways of relating to these obsessions with curiosity, really. They might just prove the raw material for a kind of future development in their life. And then finally, I think, and again, this is something I come across a lot in that sense, I think it's keeping in mind the need to stay hidden in adolescence and young adulthood. If you think about it, there's something a little premature about as a young adult, kind of fully exposing ourselves to the world too quickly before we've had the chance to mold ourselves into a coherent enough kind of sense of self and individuality. And so sometimes adolescents and young adults appear very kind of evasive and slippery in conversation or in their kind of behaviors in that sense, or sometimes they're not available for communication at all. They completely shut down. And we may find ourselves as kind of parents, kind of berating our children or not quite understanding what's going on, and again, feeling anxious in that sense. And I think it's important then not to kind of over personalize this kind of refusal of contact, and just, again, to take a step back, to bracket our own kind of reactions to that, in a sense, and to really start to wonder about why they might be withdrawing or appearing kind of sullen or sulky, even in that sense. And there's wisdom in resisting the urge to become a kind of virtual ultrasound technician, where we take these kind of x-rays of our children and try and work out a definitive image of these young adults, and before they're ready to fully live what's going on in them on an emotional kind of level out fully in the world. So making space for kind of curiosity and also not knowing around our children too.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's interesting. Yes, I definitely hear what you're saying about sort of not over personalizing. These are also big themes and big sort of feelings and experiences that you're talking about. So what else do you advise parents, I guess, who are sort of experiencing this alongside their child for the first time?
So in terms of some kind of takeaway advice that's individuation informed in that sense, I think one thing I haven't mentioned yet is a key hallmark of individuation is the prospective kind of aspect of it. So when we think about our children, often we accumulate a lot of knowledge about them. We tend to see them through what's going on right now, but also through these kind of past lenses of all the accumulated knowledge of what we think we know about their character. But if we take seriously this notion that actually this is a kind of rebirth of sorts, it's really important that we're still informed by what we think we know about them and what's going on now, but we begin to lean into what is emerging in them. And it might be quite different from what we think we know about their childhood and about, what their character is. And we make space for them to try out kind of new things in that sense. So linked to that, I think it's really important to be aware of our tendency also to adult our reactions to things in a sense, and to be overly quick to kind of deride or negate or, as I said earlier, pathologize, be kind of condescending to expressions of adolescence and young adulthood. It can be kind of deeply alienating of this kind of youthful spirit. I mean, it's hard sometimes. I'm 47 and it can be hard, can't it, to kind of almost reimagine yourself at that age, and the real kind of freedom and youthfulness in that sense. And sometimes the best we can do is bracket our initial reactions in a sense. But equally, I've worked with lots of parents over the years, and I've always encouraged parents to really try and reimagine and re-encounter themselves at that age in a sense. So it might be, I was working in Southeast Asia most recently, and I was working with a mother who was really struggling to connect with even just a kind of physical level with this energy in her daughter. So we kind of hatched this plan where she managed to find old boxes of her old kind of stuff for when she was kind of 17, 18, 19, including old jumpers and, objects that held a lot of meaning. And so she began to surround herself with those. And she was starting to wear her old favorite jumper, around the house, just as a way of really starting to kind of bridge across to what it's like to be that age again. And so we're trying to relate, it's all about trying to encourage relatedness as a parent, because we need to be fathers and mothers, but also to lean into this sense of, well, what was it like to be that age in that sense? And finally, I mean, I've kind of alluded to this, with this idea of wholeness around individuation. And of course, what that means is there's various parts in all of us in a sense. And in adolescence and young adulthood, that's particularly apparent, really. And, you know, I think as healthy adults, we have to kind of develop a dialogue between our different parts. And it'd be lovely if we're feeling exactly the same all of the time, but of course we kind of bounce between different feeling states in ourselves, and we manage to cobble together a coherent enough kind of framework for that as we get older. But in adolescence, it's a much kind of quicker movement between parts. So as parents, as adults kind of working with this age group, it's important to model that that's okay, and you know, that that's a natural, again, part of our inner lives, that you know, we don't want to be stuck there forever kind of bouncing between different aspects of personality, but there's also a natural phenomenon in that sense. And that helps us to engage kind of crisis in a meaningful way when it happens.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. Are there any other sort of pressing themes that you want to talk about, or does that kind of sum it all up?
That pretty much sums it up. I'm happy to answer kind of further questions in that sense at the end. Yeah.
Thank you. So for now, I think we'll turn it over to Jess for a bit to talk about digital well-being. So you mentioned already you're quite passionate about the subject. But what do you mean when you talk about digital well-being?
Right, so before we define digital well-being, let's define well-being in general. And there are many different definitions of that, but for the purpose of this webinar, I'm referring to the interconnected states of our emotional, physical, social, and cognitive sort of well-being, those 4 areas. Now, we are generally at our optimum state when there's balance across those 4 areas. A good example is sleep. So we all know if you've had a terrible night's sleep, you wake up and you're less likely to go to the gym. You're more likely to go for a coffee or sugar. You probably aren't as focused in class, and your reaction times definitely aren't as good. Whereas if you've had a great night's sleep, your mood is probably a bit brighter, you're able to focus in class, and you are probably quite up for that exercise class. So you see how one area of that well-being sort of circle, if you will, can impact the other areas. So when I talk about digital well-being, I'm referring to the impact that digital technology, devices, and the internet has on those areas of our well-being. Now, there are, of course, positive and negative impacts, and I want to say that this is not meant to be an internet tech bashing session. There are so many wonderful things about technology and the internet that we have definitely experienced over COVID. I'm sure many of us have really seen the benefits, but we also can't get away from some of the real negatives and the ones that are really becoming very apparent in the young adults that we work with. And I'm sure many of your children on here today. And yeah, there are lots of threats now that I think we need to address.
What are some of the biggest threats to young adults today with relation to digital technology? So
if you Google biggest threats imposed by digitalization, you'll get answers like deep fake news, sleep issues, cyberbullying, identity theft. Now, all of these are fair and real threats. However, based on the demographic and the age group that we work with and what we see every day at Dallington, the threats that we're going to talk about today are issues with sleep, attention, creativity, loneliness, and anxiety. And I'm just going to go through those one by one. I will also come to solutions towards the end, so please don't feel like this is all doom, but I'm just going to outline the main issues first. So attention. I think we all agree that if you want to do something well, it really needs to be done, without distraction and with attention. And I don't just mean, doing your homework or a vision or learning how to drive, which is very important to be focused on. I also mean things like conversations and building relationships and problem solving. How many times have you been in a situation where you didn't feel fully heard because the other person wasn't quite paying attention? Or perhaps you felt bad because you weren't the one really listening and you were slightly distracted. Ultimately, empathy is one of our most advanced forms of attention, but it's under attack. And I think everyone needs to understand that it's really, for the most part, not your fault, not our fault. How many, I can't see a show of hands, but hopefully many of you saw The Social Dilemma on Netflix. Now, this gave really good insight overview to how technology and social media platforms are designed to maintain your attention. Because ultimately, if you're not online, these companies aren't making money. So their whole modus operandi is, how do we keep your attention for as long as possible? I do find it slightly ironic that Netflix publicly did say that their biggest competition is sleep. No other company, but that's their biggest competition. But they put this film out for us. So, I mean, they're trying to tackle it from both sides. But billions are invested every year in how to keep your attention. So I think the first thing is to, don't feel bad, understand that. But did you know that if you get interrupted when you're focusing, when you're in that deep flow, it'll take you 23 minutes on average to get back to that same level of focus. Now, how many times are you getting interrupted? It's definitely not once an hour. For most of, myself, young adults, unless you're managing this correctly, you're getting interrupted repeatedly, definitely if you've got your notifications turned on. So we need to understand the long-term impact of that, because after a while, if you're not being interrupted, you'll interrupt yourself. I mean, how many of us on this call have been in a situation where the phone has not rung, but you've just gone to pick it up just to check, and that's what this is doing to us. So after a while, it's, really decreasing our long-term ability to focus and pay attention. Now, many of our mentees have an ADD or ADHD diagnosis. And of course, we take this very seriously and respect any medication that is necessary. However, we also believe it's really important to address the way that technology is impacting attention, and to address some of the maybe more natural holistic solutions in addition to whatever else they need. And the big one, which impacts all of us, no matter the age, I think, is sleep. So sleep, despite what we all may think, is a very active process. How many of us have woken up after a really bad night's sleep and you feel almost hungover, you feel groggy, you feel, you reach for that caffeine? That's because during slow wave sleep, the brain cleans itself of metabolic waste. It's basically getting rid of the toxins in your brain. It's like a brain bath. And if you haven't slept well, those are still hanging around. And they will continue to hang around until you've had good, deep sleep. The prefrontal cortex is the judgment area of the brain. When you haven't had enough sleep, your reaction times are slower. Hence why many people have more accidents and road accidents when they haven't had enough sleep. In the UK, the NHS has been on a good decade-long initiative to get us to all eat healthier. And it would seem maddening that we would deprive, our young adults of a healthy diet, yet we're really allowing them to have a bad sleep diet through generally unrestricted access to their phones, which are, as we know, very much designed to keep them awake. And we're not giving them the education they need on how to make those choices. So if we're not sleeping well, we're not allowing the body to recover and also to transfer all of that information that we've learned in the day at school or at university or at work into our long-term memory. And we repeatedly see issues. I'm sure you see this too, Daniel, but many of our mentees do have an increased workload. Absolutely, schools are piling on the workload. It is tough to manage. But, when they're spending evenings and weekends because they can't quite remember or retain what they were studying, that comes down to sleep and attention, not, a bad teacher or bad work. It's just the fact that they're not able to retain it. The sleep is so important to retain that information. Which stems me into our next threat, which is creativity. Creativity stems from boredom and the ability to connect one idea with another. It also stimulates our desire to connect socially and allows our minds to wander freely and find something new, not just regurgitate something we've already seen. Now, I don't know about everybody on this webinar, but before, I didn't have a phone growing up when I was at school, and I thank God, but in my summers I got so bored that me and my siblings or my neighbors would go out all day and we would build something. You would devise, star and direct your own truly awful play for your parents. You would maybe make a new friend, and even better, maybe fall in love. These are the things that we spent our summers doing, but partly because we were bored, you know. And I think we have to see boredom as a real privilege, because it really opens that and it allows us to make those connections. So, you know, when we get to that uncomfortable stage where you're really itching for your phone, we've just got to get past that and allow the boredom and all of the benefits of boredom to take over. And I'll come to how to do that a bit later. One of the other areas is loneliness. Now, our smartphones and digital devices meet so many of our needs now, on the surface at least, be that social, emotional, and even sexual, that it's really driving many young people into isolation. You know, we're humans, we need each other fundamentally. And many of our mentees cite loneliness as a reason for low mood, anxiety, or even depression. But the phone, truly, like any other drug, and we do need to see it like that in this context, is actually very effective at temporarily taking away a bad feeling. So you feel lonely, you didn't get invited to that party, you didn't hear from somebody you wanted to, the boy didn't call you back, it's fine. I'm on TikTok, that's an hour of my life gone, it'll just take me out of that feeling. But if they couldn't rely on that device, how long would they sit in it until they did something about it? You know, we've got to learn to resist that urge and work on our delayed gratification. You know, and it is possible to have online friendships, as I've seen with many of our mentees have online friendships that seem to be, very legitimate and decent. However, they mustn't replace those offline. Social skills are just that. They are skills. They are learned and developed through practice and trial and error. You know, as young people, we learned by, carrying conversation, introducing yourself, saying the wrong thing, frankly, getting it wrong, having to correct that, learning how to be a good listener. These are all really hard to develop online. You've got to develop these in person. You've got to stand in front of somebody and see their reaction change for good or for bad, and be able to work on that. That's a skill you need to do with somebody. And we find that our mentees who do manage those transitional times that Farah was talking about earlier, be that from school to uni, or uni to the workplace, or from one country to another, the ones who seem to enjoy that or manage it better are the ones who can rely on their social skills. At least at those initial stages where you're having to make new friends and you're having to speak to your dorm mate for the first time. Those are things that we need to develop. So the next area is anxiety. So, and I think this is the final one, yes. So the correlation between high internet use, because when we say technological devices, really what we're talking about is the internet and the access to it. Because if you take away the internet off your phone, I mean, unless any of us have snakes left on our Nokia, 2810s or whatever they were, the phone's pretty boring. So the correlation between the internet and high anxiety is quite significant, and for many reasons, but the main ones are these. We've all got enough thoughts and worries of our own without being aware of everyone else's. Of course we need to know what's going on in the world. Of course our children and young adults should be aware of the news, but this concept of breaking news is no longer really legitimate. When you're getting breaking news every half an hour, after a while you actually turn off to it. I remember during COVID seeing that, on all of the different newspaper websites, they had that banner on the top that had the daily global death toll. I mean, to some degree, consciously or not, that's going to have an impact on you. So we have to really limit how much information we're taking in from everybody else. As a result, this also, increases our levels of cortisol, which is, the fight or flight stimulant. And it's just that thing that makes you feel like you've had a few coffees, even if you hadn't, which is not going to help you if you already have had a few coffees, frankly, too. Now, there are no boundaries to the internet. As humans, we love and strive for completion, you can't finish the internet. And TikTok and Instagram are perfect examples of designs that have been made that you will never finish. You can keep scrolling. There will always be something to keep going. And so it's a sort of doomed search for completion. And that's why you never feel sort of satisfied on those apps. Comparison is also the thief of joy. Now, given the age group that we look after, many of them are obviously on Instagram and social media sites that really do compare and are all about imagery and not about the backstory. But it's no wonder when so many of them are looking at these really unrealistic, filtered, false images of people. Majority, I might add, of people they don't know, have no connection to, are celebrities or influencers in other countries, that they feel really unhappy with, their lot. I think we have to think again. I'll continue using this analogy of sort of a diet. If we are what we eat, we're also what we consume from media. So if our mentees are all sitting around just looking at people who they deem to be more attractive than them or wealthier or living a better life, then how is that going to impact them? So when our mentees come to us, if they are citing issues around anxiety and self-esteem, one of the first things we will do is really address what we call their digital diet before rushing to a more clinical diagnosis.
Okay, thank you so much. That was so thorough and all really interesting. So yeah, I mean, I guess the next way you've suggested that it's not all doom and gloom, that there are ways of thinking about how we can sort of move past this. What are some of the ways that we can help teenagers develop healthier digital habits?
Okay, so number one, without a doubt, seems like a simple solution. It is to turn off your notifications. The only notification I get is when I have a call coming in or when my taxi's arrived. That's it. We don't need to have WhatsApp and Instagram notifying us all the time. You can go into those apps and check them. I would just turn off those non-essential notifications. Put your phones down as parents. That's the second one. So we can't expect better behavior from our young adults if we're not setting better examples for them. And asking them to, be better with their tech is like putting them on a really good healthy meal plan, and we're sitting there on the sofa having a chocolate bar. We've really got to show them that we're there with them. And I want to say that's really hard because we also have very busy lives as, adults, parents, people in the working world, and we have people to be accountable to, but therefore lean into, what we call transparent parenting by being open with them. And certainly our group are 16 to 24, they are old enough to know that, we also struggle with that, and that we do have people chasing us in a WhatsApp group that's gone crazy and we just want to ignore it. Talk to them about it. And I would say even be accountable to them. So I'm not sure about you guys, but I have to go to a gym class where someone is shouting at me to do the work. I'm not going to go and lift those weights on my own. If you're accountable, you're much more likely to actually see a habit change that transition through when it gets tough. So be accountable to each other at home, or get the children, if they're siblings or friends, to do it with each other. The other thing is get educated. We really need to think of the internet like a kitchen, okay? It's a place for amazing creativity, lots of nourishment, lots of really good things can come out of a kitchen. But it could be quite dangerous if it's not used safely. You wouldn't let your child, for the first time ever, roam freely into a kitchen and go, have a go at the blender and the hob and the oven and the knives and the grater, without demonstrating how to use these things safely. But the internet's developing so quickly in these devices that, we're not educating them. We're just letting them go freely into the kitchen, as it were, and work it out. So there are many tools online, and after this webinar, I'll make sure to get a list over to you, Daniel, for you to share. The Centre for Humane Technology is a big one because it's a website that was created by all the designers who left the big firms like Google and Amazon and decided to make decided they were against some of the models that they were using to maintain attention. So that's a good free tool. We also run digital technology and digital wellbeing courses for our families and young adults, which really covers everything from the neuroscience of how dopamine affects the brain and how technology will impact you, down to really practically cleaning up your devices, understanding how they work, and how to have better conversations. I'd also really encourage independence. So as Dan outlined earlier, being a young adult is all about identity and individuality. And so many of our young adults believe themselves to be creating these really new, unique posts and content, but a lot of it's frankly just regurgitating something they've already seen. And if they're following, all of the same influences and all the same type of blog, how broad is their thinking going to be? We need to think about this in terms of, college and the working world. If you go to an interview, you want to be able to show that you have a broad mind and that you can think about a variety of topics from different types of people, and not just one sort of category, as it were. So really encouraging that. Of course, it is really difficult to tell a 16 to 24-year-old how to use their device. They're very protective of it. It's sort of, it's a real part of them, an extension of them to some degree. So you do have to be careful, I agree. But we find that shoulder to shoulder conversations, either walking and talking or even in the car, can be the best way, because it's non-confrontational, it's not eye to eye. You can sort of discuss some of these topics openly without feeling like they're being confronted. I would always encourage them to speak to someone who's a little bit older than them, but not as old as their parents, because they'll feel more relatable. But finally, you really need to have a positive reason to want to make a change in your household. So, it's the same with anything. If you haven't got an end goal as to why you're doing something, we always fall at the first hurdle. So whatever that reason to have better digital health is, be it that you want better sleep, better focus, better grades, you want to test your creativity, just commit to it and be patient. Just like eating one salad doesn't make you healthy and one burger doesn't make you unhealthy, it's something you've got to do consistently. And really, I would say a year is a really good amount of time to work through something. And like I said before, give yourself a break. These tools are designed to keep your attention. And coming back to Dan's word earlier, curiosity. So at Dallington, we always just ask our families that we work with and our mentees to always just do two things, which is be curious, be accountable. If you can be curious about what's going on, why you weren't able to be accountable, you can usually find a solution. If you're not able to be curious, be accountable, just show up, and one of these ways you usually find a solution.
Thank you so much, Jess. That's all really, really, really helpful advice, and hopefully really tangible things that parents can sort of bring out of this conversation and apply. So thank you for that. I wonder if we could just sort of turn back to Farah for some final thoughts, really, with everything in mind that we've learned today about individuation and digital well-being. Can you speak a bit about what the role of a mentor can offer to young adults?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think we've covered some really important touch points and highlighted some really key challenges that this developmental period poses. But what I would say is first to think about and reflect on our own experiences. Many of us will have experienced some form of informal mentorship at some point in our lives. That might be us adopting the role of a mentor, where we're drawing on our own expertise and guidance, or perhaps turning to someone else for theirs. And I think the first thing to sort of set out is that there are really a whole host of definitions and styles of mentorship that exist out there. That's demonstrated between ESM and your wonderfully holistic academic mentorship, Daniel. And as we've sort of spoken about today, our approach at Dallington, which has these more psychological underpinnings. But what I would say is that we have found that there are benefits to having possibly a constellation of mentors, or also to seek out a mentor to maybe support you through a different period in your life. Sort of the things that you're working on and the nature of where you want to be channeling that energy does shift. And so mentors can see you through certain parts of that. But yes, if there is one thing that we have covered today, it is that it's very natural for young adults to be quite adamant in creating some distance from their families, and as such really do dig their heels in and are resistant to advice, are resistant to the advice from parents or positions of authority. The idea of being told by your parent to put your phone down or come home a bit earlier, it's really hard for that to be heard. And so that is why we really do find having a mentor, particularly at this age, between 16 and to 24, can be so effective. But sort of crucial to the success of that is really the quality and the authenticity of a mentoring relationship. And so what we do at Dallington is really allow significant time and space for that rapport to be built organically before we sort of start more goal-oriented work. And as Jess mentioned, there is really sort of what we'd call like a sweet spot, so to speak, of the relatability of a mentor. So that there is something there in the ages where it's young adults do relate better to sort of people who are, of course, older than them, but slightly younger than their parents. And so it's with that relatability that when a mentor maybe draws on their personal experience or does reach out with some guidance, it is more openly received. But also sort of beyond that, it's about the mentoring relationship and what that connection can offer. So the presence of a stable and supportive figure, one that exists beyond the home or schooling sort of environment, it can not only be grounding, but a mentor can really support a young person to step up to some of the responsibilities that adulthood asks of us, and to step up to that with sort of an enriched level of self-belief and vigor. So that's certainly one part of it. The other part of a mentoring relationship is that it's, for some of our young people, the first time that they are having a stable and deep non-familial relationship modeled to them. It's something that we tend to work relatively long term with our mentees. It's sort of anywhere between 6 months to a number of years. And so one of the key facets of our mentorship is that it really offers a level of connectedness, particularly to some young people who might be feeling isolation for some of the reasons that we've spoken about today. And as Jess sort of circled back to, that's what we can offer as mentors. And what we ask of our mentees in return, it is deceptively simple. It is just that idea to remain curious and to remain accountable to themselves throughout the process. Because yes, that is something that we can always work with. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that brief overview for now, but please do feel free to sort of ping us any questions after this and we can explain a bit more about the way that we work.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. Thank you all of you for your time today. I certainly have learned a lot. I think our families will have as well. I'll give you a chance if there's any final thoughts anyone wants to offer. Otherwise, I think we'll begin to sort of wrap it up there.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, just let us know if any questions come through and we can send an overview.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. We hope you're bringing some real actionable, tangible pieces of advice out of this conversation today. Happy to connect you with Dallington if you want to sort of talk about this further, talk about your individual child or family. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.